Speaking of Harry, he had lost in an absolutely crushing defeat this £50 million lawsuit against the Associated Newspapers Limited. Rejected every single count. The judge said that everything had been dismissed, said they'd failed to prove their cases. What was your reaction on hearing that? I mean, how bad is it?
Harry's not got that kind of money. So one does wonder who's bankrolling this court case, because there's no way Harry's got all those millions to pay all those legal costs. It's incredibly damaging and wounding for him. Meghan is going to have to sell a whole lot more jam.
Yes, well, hello, it is Tom Sykes, the Royalist here, and welcome to the Royalist podcast. And my goodness, have we got a smasher? Have we got a belter? Have we got a corker of a show to you today? You might think I'm being dramatic if you haven't seen the news today, because the news is extraordinary. The dragon won. Yes, Harry utterly humiliated today in his massive privacy lawsuit against Associated Newspapers Limited, the publishers of the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday. Everything that he said, everything that his friends said, thrown out on every single count. Complete vindication for the Mail. A shattering end to the Duke's 6-year war on the British tabloids, ending not with the crowning triumph he had scripted for himself, but with the most complete, the most expensive, and a totally self-inflicted humiliation of his career. And of course, this judgment lands at absolutely terrible time for Harry, just as it appears that King Charles has finally run out of patience with his errant son, denying him rooms at Buckingham Palace. For those of you watching in real time, you know how much I appreciate you, and I'm here in the comments, I hope, commenting along and enjoying the show with you. Please don't forget to like the show, give me a thumbs up, all that good stuff. I tell you, it's an absolute cracker of a show. And let's get into today's Royal Rundown. So first up, we've got a Royalist special report in which I crave your mercy to allow me to tell you all about my new book, which is called The Dukes in the US and The Dukes of Hazzard in the UK. Then we have Tea with Tom, and we have Paula Froelich on a royal kiss and tell, sex secrets of a senior royal. I mean, really, what more could you ask for? And then we have our royal insider, the storied royal correspondent, Valentine Lowe, none other than the man himself, joins me to dissect an extraordinary few days for Prince Harry and to talk about his new book, Power and the Palace. So, let's get into our Royalist special report. And I have to tell you, it's all about me. Aha, yes, finally I can talk about it. I am so excited to be able to share here for the very first time with all my amazing fans on the Royalist all the details of my forthcoming book. It's called The Dukes in the US and The Dukes of Hazzard in the UK. And I've got two amazing publishing houses behind me. Penguin Michael Joseph in the UK. Yep, so I'm going to get a penguin on the back of my book. And St. Martin's Press in the US. It's coming out on February the 23rd next year. I'm planning events and parties in London and New York to mark the occasion. And of course in Rathvilly in Ireland, where I live. And members of this channel and of my Substack will get early access invites. So please do think about becoming a fully paid up member of the Royalist Club, because as you know, as Prince Harry knows, half in, half out just ain't going to cut it. So what's the book about? Well, I'm getting excited, knocking my mic over. It's the blockbuster story of how these two renegade dukes, right? Harry, the Duke of Sussex, and Andrew, formerly the Duke of York, and they're known behind palace walls as the Dukes of Hazzard, how they have brought the monarchy to its lowest ebb since David, Duke of Windsor, formerly Edward VIII, abandoned the throne in 1936 to marry Wallis Simpson. It's a study of the remarkable parallels between these three embittered, infantilized, and naive men, and of course, their wives. It's also the story of how King Charles's appalling handling of the Harry and Andrew crises has triggered a catastrophic meltdown in the monarchy's moral standing, its global reputation, and its domestic popularity. Now, look, the UK legacy media keeps insisting, open the British newspapers, Charles is doing a terrific job as king. I mean, I'm sorry, but the hard truth, the data shows that he has made a complete mess of it. Since he came to the throne, just one example, one recent poll showed that support for the monarchy has gone from 65% to 55%. These are unbelievable numbers. And they are ones that will only get worse if he persists with this insanely unpopular effort to rehabilitate Harry and Meghan, that frankly, we saw the wheels come off very badly this week and seriously embarrassing to the king, I think, as well as the fault that attaches to Harry and Meghan. I think the events this week are very embarrassing that the king didn't shut this nonsense down a long time ago. And on that note, the book also really talks a lot about the bitter enmity between Prince William and the King, and the way they feel very differently about how these two men should be treated, but also about how this is the latest expression of a rift that really goes all the way back to William's traumatic childhood, with the years after his mother's tragic death, how he took her side in that domestic fallout. And it tells how Harry and Meghan's denunciation of William and Catherine left them so stunned and appalled, and they just feel so angry at their father's instinct to try and conciliate and make up. And we saw it with the Yorks. We saw Charles spend all his political capital trying to rehabilitate Andrew and Sarah. And now we are seeing it with the Sussexes. In stark contrast, I might add, to the ruthlessly effective exile of the Duke of Windsor, which was, of course, initiated by George VI and continued by his daughter, Elizabeth II. And so I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, why don't I get to read about this story in the UK legacy media? Well, it's very simple. It's because they are terrified of angering the King's press office. If they anger the press office, they will get cut off from access to the king. So they've declined to tell the story. Now, I can tell it because, as you know, in 2025, I was thrown off the International Royal Rota for reporting completely accurately, I want to add, that the king's cancer was incurable. Tobin Andre, the king's press officer, informed me that my headline was tasteless and that he was withdrawing all cooperation with me in the Daily Beast. Do you know, it was a completely blatant attempt to end my 30-year career as a royal writer. And what's even worse is that my fate was explicitly held up as a warning to intimidate other journalists out of writing anything about the true state of the king's health. Unfortunately for the palace, my fearless bosses at the Daily Beast, Joanna Coles and Hugh Doherty, not only stood by me, they encouraged me to go even harder, not just on the story of the king's health, but on all the stories protected by this cozy conspiracy of silence at the heart of the British establishment. And that's exactly what I've been doing ever since, with your support on my Substack, on this channel. And far from destroying my livelihood, as the king's operatives had hoped, or silencing me, my expulsion has turned out to be a tremendous blessing. It's freed me really to tell this story across multiple different platforms in a really, I hope, new and exciting way, across YouTube, across Substack, across the Daily Beast, across social media, across the podcast, and now across this book. And it's an absolutely astonishing story, that the damage that the king's response to the Andrew and Harry crisis has inflicted on the royal family in such a short period of time. Think where the royal family was just a couple of years ago and where it is now. And this existential struggle between the king and his heir that these Dukes of Hazzard have provoked. So I'm going to be telling the truth in the Dukes of Hazzard, tracing the through line from Edward VIII to Andrew to Harry. Extraordinary parallels between the two American divorcees at the heart of this story, Wallis Simpson and Meghan Markle, perceived as adventuresses by their critics, adored and followed into exile by very naive, almost infantilized husbands who really didn't, were brought up in great privilege and didn't really have any idea how the real world worked. And we also get into the parallels on the other side, of course, the loyal Windsor wives, the Queen Mother and Princess Catherine, who really is shaping up to be this generation's saviour of the monarchy, I would argue. William was incredibly contemptuous of his father's failed efforts in the first 3 years of his reign to rehabilitate Prince Andrew. And we saw it, didn't we? Those walks to church, the appearances at all the church services. Um, and what I also reveal in this book is the extent to which Charles helped cover up Andrew's wrongdoing. Um, William is now absolutely dismayed watching his father making what one ally described to me as the same mistake all over again by attempting to bring Harry and Meghan back into the royal fold and back to Britain. And as we've seen, it hasn't gone particularly well this week. The truth is that William fears for his own inheritance as much as for his father's legacy. And the book reveals the extraordinary lengths to which he is prepared to go to ensure that the reign of his son, King George VII, will not be capsized by a future generation of disgruntled and vexatious spares. So look, thank you so much to all the supporters of the Royalist out there, all the subscribers, all the viewers, everybody who's engaged and left a comment or given a thumbs up or anything. I'm so incredibly grateful for your support. I absolutely don't take it for granted. And I want to tell you one thing. I am determined to make this the best royal book ever, packed full of juicy stories and exclusive revelations from inside this secret world. And now we have tea with Tom. I think we need a bit of a change of pace. And who better to deliver a change of pace than Paula Froelich, my old friend. Paula, I want to talk to you about Ruthie Henshall's 5-year love affair with Prince Edward, as revealed in the pages of the Daily Mail over the weekend. Did you read it with as much entranced delight as I did?
I did. And you know what I loved so much, Tom, is that nobody really gives Edward a second thought. He's always just that other brother, right? And all of a sudden, it took how many years to make him interesting and awesome and all these questions kind of like answered? I mean, I love the fact that in this book, Ruthie points out, no, he's not gay. And that they met at Cats. And the reason why the gay rumors started is because he left the Marines to go join Andrew Lloyd Webber's company as a production assistant. And of course, everybody said, oh my gosh, a guy in the theater, he must be gay. It's the same thing that they said about Hugh Jackman years ago, right? And turns out, no, he was not gay.
It's very funny though, isn't it? Because one of their first dates, he invites her to come over for dinner and to watch a Judy Garland movie.
He was a friend of Judy, but not in that way. What what I loved about it, though, is that he's so unlike Andrew. He is the actual opposite of Prince Andrew. He doesn't, he's very respectful. He also says to her, listen, I just want to move really, really slowly. And in fact, it took him weeks to actually kiss her and months for them to, go a little deeper in their relationship. But it was actually quite sweet, and she said she felt completely respected, and when he introduced her to his family, even before they had had relations, everyone was just so lovely to her and nice, and nobody talked down to her. They didn't care about her accent. They didn't care, even though the queen had said when Edward joined the production company, she said, "Oh, I hope he doesn't bring home a showgirl."
Hey, it's amazing, isn't it? There's actually some amazing insights into the Queen and some wonderful anecdotes about the Queen and the rest of the family. There's actually a lovely anecdote of Charles chasing the boys up and down the corridors at Balmoral, which I really I thought was a beautiful kind of insight into a softer side of Charles that we very rarely see.
And also the other thing is that she made the remark that it was clear how much he loved those boys, which is really poignant considering what's going on today.
She seems to have had a slightly frosty relationship with Princess Diana, oddly, doesn't she? I mean, there's a few little barbs at Princess Diana, like Princess Diana doesn't help her out of a sticky situation once, and just a couple of little things that it appears they weren't greatest of friends. but she clearly loves the Queen. And there is an amazing story when they're at Balmoral, where they all start singing. Did you catch that one?
Yes. I loved it. And then she sang, I dreamed a dream, and so loud that the queen said, she's got a set of lungs on her. I love it. But, she did make some points about Diana, that Diana was a little cold, icy, not as warm as someone like Fergie. However, to be fair, this was in the middle of the Queen's Annus Horribilis, and the Andrew Morton book had been released, and it sounds like Diana was not in the best place, and that her and Charles were in a horrible place, and that everyone was not having a real great time with each other, and by that I mean Diana and the royal family. So it could not have been easy for Diana to have this young, good-looking, free-spirited girl just welcomed in open-armed.
There's so many brilliant details in it, aren't there? And one of the details that I really love is that all of Edward's underpants have a name tape in them saying HRH Edward. And as she says, it's because, all the washing is done centrally by the laundry. And so obviously everything has to be name taped.
It's crazy. I mean, imagine if you got an HRH Andrew instead. Ooh. You I mean, I guess everyone knows where the stains are, don't they? It was very odd, though. It's very it sounded like Buckingham Palace was like camp, where you have to put all your names and everything so that nothing gets lost. Very odd. But you know what I liked is that when they dated for 5 years, most of the time it was kept secret. At the very end, it was revealed publicly. Housemaid had told the papers. And Edward was just so lovely about it, and it just kinda seemed like it ended naturally and that they're still friendly, and at one point, he said, "Let's go on a double date with your new boyfriend and this woman I'm seeing, Sophie."
Yeah, it's all incredibly grown up, the ending of the relationship, isn't it? They go out for a foursome dinner and they all wish each other well and feel happy with their future lives. I mean, my goodness, it's not how I remember relationships ending.
Not in my 20s, but I will say what I loved was that, at the end of the book, she goes, "Gosh, I hope this doesn't embarrass Edward." And I'm sure it will, but I would like to say, "Thank you, Ruthie, because you actually humanized this man that none of us know very well, that a lot of people don't really talk about, and it makes you really like him." So I actually think that while Edward might be embarrassed, he actually owes her a thank you note.
I totally agree. I think that probably, he would rather that this book hadn't come out. And I don't know what Ruthie Henshall's motivations were for writing it, but, we all have to pay the bills. And I'm sure he would rather that it hadn't come out. But at the same time, I think that he just comes out of it incredibly well, like a real human. And I think particularly why it kind of sort of strikes you as so genuine is because she is quite critical at times of not only him but also herself. She's quite hard on herself. She talks about her own kind of struggles with having been sexually abused as a child, and this giving her this condition where she pulls out her hairs from her eyebrows or something. It sounds horrific. And she explains this to Edward, and Edward kind of rather breezily says, "Oh, don't worry, it'll probably you'll probably get over it. It'll probably go away." And so I felt that it feels fair, doesn't it? It feels like it's quite fair. And as you say, I think he owes her a thank you note as well.
Well, also, what I thought was interesting is that there's so much criticism about the royal family and their workings. We've had Diana's side, we've had obviously Harry's side, and they always come off as like a little cold, but in Ruthie's telling, it's a really lovely, warm family. And they actually seem to like each other and are respectful to each other. It's really a side of the Queen Mother, and even Charles that you don't ever get to see. And how Edward really turned out to be a good guy, most likely because his family was so loving and supported. Did the Queen really want him dating a showgirl? Probably not. But at the same time, the entire royal family showed up to see her even after they were kind of on the rocks.
No, I absolutely agree, and I actually really enjoyed the portrait of the Queen Mother. And funny enough, hopefully next week I've got Jamie Lowther Pinkerton coming on the show. He was a sort of equerry to the Queen Mother, who was then Harry's first private secretary to Harry and William, and he's written a novel. It's not a memoir, but he's coming on the show. And he actually, one of the things I really want to talk to him about is the Queen Mother, because he has really made this point that she was very misrepresented in the crown as a kind of inebriated old bat, basically. And in fact, and she comes across in this as well as sort of almost the glue holding the whole thing together in a way. I mean, in a very kind of perceptive and a warm person.
I mean, just listen, the stories about the Queen Mother are long in legend, and she may have had a bottle of gin a day, but I'll tell you what, Tom, if you're used to a bottle of gin a day, you don't get inebriated off a bottle of gin anymore, do you? So I can't imagine that she was just wandering around a little tipsy. No. And also, for a woman that age, let her do what she wants. She earned it.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, no, it's a brilliant. I think it's a brilliant little addition to the kind of subgenre of and Ruthie's book I'm talking about is a kind of brilliant addition to that subgenre of memoirs that have surprising details about the royal family, buried within them, that tell us a bit of the context around what they're really like behind closed doors. And I just found it a lovely, lovely insight.
I agree. And also, you know what I thought was interesting is look at how Meghan Markle portrayed the family. And it just seems like the complete polar opposite. Like they were actually very loving, very welcoming, very non-judgmental. And it it does give them a new, softer, calmer light in my mind.
It does, although I think that one thing she does say, which I definitely took on board, is she says that she didn't think that they ever took her seriously as wife material or marriage material. And she thinks that counterproductively, that may have been part of why they were so unguarded around her, which I thought was actually a really intelligent insight.
Yeah, no, she had a lot of great insights, but you know what I liked as well is that when Edward looked at her and basically said, "I can't bring a woman I love into this job. You don't understand what's going to happen," which is why, she resented for 5 years that she was a secret girlfriend, but he was like, "You don't know what's about to happen to your life if this becomes public." And also, it's the same thing that William tried to tell Harry. Are you sure she's ready? Do you not need to take some time? Because everyone seemed to understand Edward, Charles, everyone, William, that the job is all encompassing. And Harry just looked at William and said, "How dare you?" And ran off. And sure enough, Meghan was not ready or up for the job.
And on that note, I mean, the wisest words in the whole book go to Sarah Ferguson, who at the Balmoral drinks party, where the Balmoral barbecue, they've all gone off to this little house by Loch Muck, where they're a derelict house with no electricity. They're all barbecuing and drinking, and the Queen and Princess Margaret are singing hymns together. They're singing "Abide with Me." And that's when Diana asks her to intervene and sing something, and she sings "I Dreamed a Dream." And at the end of it all, Sarah Ferguson turns around and says, "I'd get out while you still can if I were you."
I mean, and notice was taken. She did then start dating a Broadway actor after. I mean,
Always great to have a giggle with my old pal Paula Froelich. She'll be keeping an eye on the news this week, I'm sure, on her Substack. Tell us all your social media channels, Paula, so I don't get it wrong.
will do. You can find me on YouTube at Paula Froelich, Froelich, on Substack at Paula Froelich Uncensored, or Instagram at PFro, kind of like J-Lo, but not.
And if you're old-fashioned, they can now get you on News Nation multiple times a week on your own show.
That's true.
Woo! Fancy pants.
All right. Thanks, Nutty. I love you.
I love you too. Well, it's time for the moment you've all been waiting for, our Royal Insider. My guest today needs little introduction to anyone who follows the royal story. Valentine Lowe was very famously the royal correspondent at the Times for well over a decade, 15 years, I think, but he can clarify that in a minute. He's the reporter who broke the bullying allegations against Meghan Markle, the story that really lifted the lid on life inside the Sussex household and made headlines around the world in his book, Courtiers, the hidden power behind the crown. And that, of course, was a Sunday Times bestseller. Well, he followed it up with an absolutely really scholarly and fascinating book, his new work, which is called Power and the Palace. And I've managed to get Valentine back on the show because the paperback of Power and the Palace is coming out with some new juicy details inside it. It's based on nearly 100 interviews with former prime ministers, civil servants, private secretaries. And it actually completely rewrites our understanding of how the monarchy operates behind closed doors. Now, Valentine, we're going to get on to today's extraordinary breaking news about Prince Harry losing this monster lawsuit. But the algorithms of the internet dictate that we must talk about your book first and save the Prince Harry bit till afterwards so that we tell everybody about your fantastic new paperback of Power and the Palace. For anyone who hasn't read the book, Valentine, what's the elevator pitch? Give us the big idea.
It's basically about what's the relationship between the sovereign, the king or the queen, and the government. And in a nutshell, a couple of 100 years ago, sovereigns bossed around prime ministers. Now, prime ministers boss around sovereigns. And the book is a look at how it all changed and how did we get to where we are today. And along the way, there's some juicy gossip. It's very sweet of you, Tom, to call my book scholarly. I hope that doesn't give the wrong impression that it's boring. I hope very much it's not boring because there's some juicy gossip. You know, what Camilla told Boris Johnson, was the Queen really a Brexiteer, all sorts of stuff. And in the end, what the book is about is how the royal family has survived, because it's all about the politics and the money.
No, well, it's absolutely not boring. And the thing about Valentine's writing, as anybody who's read his books will know, is that, and part of the reason I love writing about the British royal family is because I think that it combines the opportunity to be scholarly and do your research and know your 2,000 years of history, but at the same time, write really funny copy. And I'll tell you a funny story, Valentine. I worked with Valentine years ago, my very first job at the Evening Standard. And Valentine had gone on this press trip with the then Prince Charles. And Prince Charles had come back to the back of the plane to talk to journalists. And Valentine wrote an intro. And you will have long forgotten this, Valentine, but it's stuck in my mind. You wrote an intro to the story, which in the old days, what used to be called a drop intro, where you said you compared Prince Charles coming to the back of the plane to talk to journalists to Samuel Johnson's description of a dog walking on two legs, wearing a maid's dress. And you said 'twas not done well, but 'twas a miracle 'twas done at all. And Valentine is one of the funniest prose stylists working in, well, sadly, he doesn't write for the Times anymore. He left the Times because he's become such a massive superstar with his books. Two threads really run through Power and the Palace, Valentine. As you say, this sort of change in the relationship between the Prime Minister and the monarchy over the past 200 years, that now the order of instruction has changed, but also the monarchy fighting tooth and nail to protect its money. Which of those, tell us a bit about that battle by the monarchy to hang on to its incredible wealth, power and privilege.
Well, what you've got to ask is why the British monarchy has survived, but all these other monarchies all over the world, particularly in Europe, have gone. I mean, there are only a handful left. If you look how many there were sort of before the start of the First World War, it was an awful lot. I mean, more than half of Europe was a monarchy in some form or other. Now it's just a few well-known examples like, the Netherlands and Sweden and so on. And what they've done is by accepting political reality, because as the 20th century went by, democracy grew, the franchise grew, and the British monarchy, the royal family, didn't pick a fight with this. They didn't kick up a fuss. They accepted the way things went. But they also held on to the money. They were quite assiduous about this. And don't make a mistake about this. It's not about them being rich or having a lovely sort of feather-bedded lifestyle. It's about them trying to hold on to sufficient money so they can put on a good show, be kings and queens and princes and princesses in the way that that's an old-fashioned sort of naive fairy tale way people think they should be. There's as well, no point in being a king or queen unless you live in Buckingham Palace, which of course raises the interesting question. We recently had the news confirming what everyone in the know already knew, which was that Charles and Camilla are not going to be moving back into Buckingham Palace when they finish doing the works. So they feel you've got to be able to put on a show, and of course, the money is always a source of controversy. It keeps going on and on. But I think they've accepted they've lost the political battle, and they're quite happy to be, to do what Keir Starmer tells them to do. So you saw that with Charles, entertaining Donald Trump for his second state visit in this country, then about 10 minutes later going over to the United States for a state visit over there. I'm not sure Charles thought that was a terribly good idea, certainly not the state visit here, and we've actually learned that he didn't think that was good. The palace raised their eyebrows in that sort of rather snooty way that only Buckingham Palace can. You could practically hear it the other side of St James's Park. But they raised their eyebrows when Number 10 said, "We want you to have Trump for a state visit." They said, do you really think so? Is this now the appropriate time? To which Number 10 Downing Street said, "Yes, we do. Yes, please. And we want you to do it now." So that shows how things have changed politically.
Right, because you mean that effectively the power really is not in the palace. I mean, the power lies with the government, and they said, "Listen, pal, Trump's coming, and you'd better get your golden coach ready."
Yes, I mean the book is not called Power in the Palace, is it? It's called Power and the Palace. But they still wield some influence. But they don't have power in the way they used to.
Okay, so this is a really interesting point because, it feels to me like sometimes they sort of are keen to pretend that they have less power than they do. But then we find out about archaic bits of legislation, such as, well, Queen's Assent at the time, wasn't it? When The Guardian first sort of brought that to attention, now known, I assume known as King's Assent, that really any piece of legislation, for example, and as you correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that any piece of legislation that affects the interests of either the King or the Prince of Wales cannot be debated in Parliament without his express prior approval. I mean, did they try and hide how much power they do have as well as having less of it?
I think this is a fairly small example of power, but it's small but real. The principle was the Clarence House, Charles's household at the time, wanted an exception for the Duchy of Cornwall. The civil servants were not minded to give them an exception, but in the end they caved in because they didn't want to fight. Basically, they didn't want to fight with the palace, and that is a theme that runs through all of this over the decades. Politicians, civil servants don't want to fight with the palace.
I mean, it's such an interesting point because, of course, whenever you ask a politician or even really, anybody in that circuit for any kind of opinion about the royal family, I mean, they run a mile. They just don't want to talk about it. They don't want to get involved in it in any way. One of the things I think that's really interesting about the money is inheritance tax. So they pay no inheritance tax. That's my understanding. That there's no inheritance tax monarch to monarch.
So yeah, monarch to monarch, they pay no inheritance tax. That's right.
But Valentine, can I ask you a question? Is that a good example of where they've managed to kind of squeak around the edge and keep a considerable amount of power? Because I mean, that is a huge. I mean, inheritance tax would flatten any estate like that in 2 generations. But the fact that they don't have to pay, I think it's 25%, isn't it?
I think that's the point. If inheritance tax was applied to all that the sovereign holds and all, uh, Buckingham Palace, Balmoral, Sandringham, they'd all be, as you say, whether be wiped out in about 2 or 3 generations. And the question is, do you want to see that? And although I'm no royalist, I would argue you don't. But the rest of them do pay inheritance tax. It's just sovereign to sovereign.
Yes. And there are, of course, overlaps between Power in the Palace and Courtiers, your first blockbuster book about the royal family. Do you think that when we talk about power and the palace, and more specifically power in the palace, obviously a lot of what Courtiers was concerned of was how much power do the Courtiers actually have? And do you buy this thing about the men in grey suits frustrating the king's will or not?
No, because I think it's really complicated, and there are plenty of examples where the men in grey suits have failed to do that. So I think one of the best examples is the whole question of income tax. So Queen Elizabeth II didn't, for most of her reign, did not pay income tax. It was a 20th century invention, this. When income tax was introduced, Queen Victoria did pay income tax. But later on, and this is something that George VI, the Queen's father, was very keen on the idea that he shouldn't pay income tax, and inculcated that idea in his daughter's head. And there was a private secretary, an Australian guy, still alive, he's pretty ancient, Bill Heseltine, Sir William Heseltine, who I'm not sure the exact chronology, but I think mid-ish 80s, sort of 1986 or so, that sort of time, he wrote a paper suggesting that the Queen should pay income tax and set out the arguments. We don't need to rehearse them now. It's pretty obvious that a lot of people regarded it as an anomaly, and it got absolutely nowhere. And it was only a few years later when there was a lot of pressure, basically sparked off by a World in Action program, going into the question of the Queen's taxes, the pressure, the media pressure, built up against the palace, and this idea of the Queen should pay tax sort of took hold. But they don't always listen to what the courtiers say. But the courtiers are, of course, incredibly powerful, and they do have an influence. And the skillful one knows how to get their way against a reluctant principle. Sometimes you spell out the consequences. Well, yes, you could do that, but if you did this, then this will happen, and then that will happen. And is that really the outcome you necessarily want, sir? That sort of thing. Or the other great way of winning them round is to get their other half involved. So with the late Queen, she'd often say, "Oh, talk to Philip about it." I mean, Philip liked an argument, an issue, exploring things. So if you could thrash it out with Philip and convince him that your idea was a good one, that was a way of getting her to agree. And the same happens with Charles and Camilla. If you can get Camilla on side, that's incredibly important.
Did, how did they how d- well how did you feel when in Harry's book when you saw this famous description, the fly and the wasp and the bee? I mean, Clive Alderton, the idea that he's a fairly affable chap trying to do his best for considerably less money than Prince Harry has made. um did did did, did it did it upset those people to be sort of compared to insects in such personal fashion? to be for all of
I don't know what Clive felt, but Wasp, I thought, possibly absolutely spot on. But the other thing I thought was Harry didn't invent those nicknames. That was him with the help of his ghostwriter, I think. I'm not sure Harry's got the wit to think of an extended metaphor like that.
Well, speaking of Harry, not making the smartest moves, we found out earlier today that he had lost in an absolutely crushing defeat this £50 million lawsuit against the Associated Newspapers Limited. Rejected every single count. The Judge Nicklin, said that everything had been dismissed, said they'd failed to prove their cases. What was your reaction on hearing that, and what does it mean for Harry, do you think? I mean, how bad is it?
Well, first reaction, Meghan is going to have to sell a whole lot more jam. I mean, more seriously, Harry's not got that kind of money. So one does wonder, who's bankrolling this court case, because there's no way Harry's got all those millions to pay all those legal costs. Look, it's incredibly damaging and wounding for him. In the end, what you're going to remember is the last one, because the way the last one was to be is one. The Mail was the target he really had in his sights, and it meant a lot to him. And to lose that one, and to lose it so comprehensively, it is very wounding. But to look at it in an even bigger picture, don't forget Meghan's case against the Mail on Sunday, which the palace didn't think was wise to pursue. The original lawyers that Harry and Meghan had didn't think it was wise to pursue, so they changed lawyers. So and she won. She won very clearly.
Yeah, but Valentine, to be honest, winning a copyright case, which frankly, she didn't even need to go to trial, right? It was a summary judgment, because the judge said, yeah, you have infringed her copyright. I mean, they had infringed her copyright. There was no doubt about it. Like, what has happened today is a cataclysmic disaster. I mean, they were told repeatedly not to do it. And then the sort of nonsense that unfolded in court with Gavin Burrows, repudiating his own statement, with Harry saying nobody could ever possibly have got any information about me in any way other than unlawful information gathering. Then they produced that string of text messages from Charlotte Griffiths to him going, missing our snuggles, darling. It's utterly humiliating for him. And I think landing in the week that it lands, where he's trying to, this was all meant to be the big rebrand, wasn't it? Harry, I'm here for Invictus. I'm, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, surely it's a huge disaster for him.
No, of course it is a massive disaster for him, and it's the most important case, and he's lost that, and that's what people are going to remember.
So just to refresh everybody who's not caught up with the news today, so this had been a long-running case that Harry was bringing against the Mail. It had been going through the motions for several years before it's finally got to court in January. Harry gave evidence for a couple of hours in the witness box, sort of used that appearance not only to talk about the impact that the unlawful information gathering had had, but also to rehearse some of the trauma that he felt of being sort of conscripted into being a member of the royal family, having to perform for the cameras, this kind of stuff, the institution, etc., etc., etc. And then there was this very dramatic developments where one of the principal witnesses on Harry's side, Gavin Burrows, effectively repudiated his statement, said that it was forged, that it had all been made up. And then, there were these unbelievable, which I, as a journalist, actually found very offensive statements by Prince Harry, saying that nobody could ever have written a story about anything concerning any aspect of his private life without having obtained the information by unlawful information gathering. I mean, you and I, Valentine, I know you're a bit younger than me, but we came up at, I was at the Standard. I mean, I was a young reporter when you were an established reporter, but his circle was very leaky. I mean, people did get stories about Harry, right? I mean, it's absurd to claim that Katie Nicholl was only going to parties to cover up the fact that she was sitting at home ordering his phone to be hacked. I mean, it was just a nonsensical case, wasn't it?
It was a crazy case, and some of the things in the case, there were genuinely legitimate questions to answer, such as how did the Mail get hold of a flight manifest where Chelsea Davies went to go on a flight, and that is not settled. I mean, the judge ruled that you can't say it was done illegally, but it's still an interesting question left up in the air. Well, how did they get that information? Did someone bribed?
I must say, I totally agree with you on that one, Valentine. And I did think my prediction throughout was he's going to win on one thing. And I thought that he might win on that. Because basically what Rebecca English said that she'd got the information from a freelancer called Mike Bear in South Africa, was it? And Mike Bear there was this very awkward email exchange that they published. But what I found so interesting about that was that it was revealed in disclosure from the Times case. And you're almost feeling like, hang on a second, is this legal team actually interested in winning justice on this? Or is it just trying to force disclosure around a bunch of other things and then to bring them into other cases? And I just wonder, and I know Justice Nick is a very respected figure, but I understand that he was at Chambers with Justice Miss David Sherborne, and there was a lot of tension between them in the court. It was quite amusing in some ways.
He didn't leak any nonsense from Sherborne. That was very noticeable.
Do you think though that, okay, so to get back to your work and your kind of study of this whole field, is what happened to Harry today the reason that we have courtiers? Is it to stop them doing idiotic things like this, that even if he'd won, it's, so what?
I mean, one of the reasons we have courtiers, yes, is to stop them doing idiotic things. But Harry would turn that on its head. Harry used to talk about the people who worked for him. He'd say, have you got palace syndrome? Are you like the rest of them? Are you no longer defending and representing me in the way that I want, but you're just being this sort of negative, conservative, old-fashioned, stuffy sort of palace apparatchik. And again, I would go back to the Mail on Sunday case, which the courtiers and others didn't think was wise to pursue, and Meghan did, and she won. Courtiers can be overcautious. There's a much more trivial example was when before Andrew was regarded as a pariah, he thought it would be a good idea to have a charity tennis match on the tennis court at Buckingham Palace. And all the courtiers said, what? No, really? I don't think so, sir. And he then went behind their back to the Queen, and the Queen said, oh, frightfully good idea. And it happened, they did it, and it was a great success. So courtiers can, no one ever lost their job by saying no.
Right. I sort of do also think though that actually winning that copyright case for Meghan, in a way was kind of the worst thing that could have ever happened, because it completely reinforced in them this idea that everybody was ganged up against them, that all these people were trying to undermine them, that they were in cahoots with the media, which, I mean, is just not true. And, both of us have, worked in that business. It's idea that you're just being, reporters are just being fed stuff by the palace to recycle. I mean, it's complete nonsense, it's complete rubbish. And I think that winning that case, which, as I say, really, they did infringe her copyright, right? And that's why she won. And it's very clear, that bit of law, you're not allowed to publish someone else's letters. You're not allowed to publish them. That's the law. That's copyright law. And that's why I think it was a summary judgment in the end. And I think it did reinforce in Harry this paranoia, this victim status, that all of these people were working against him because they didn't say, yeah, come on, Harry, let's go and sue. Let's win a copy. I mean, it's a bizarre hill to die on, right? If you had lost. Now, the fact that they won, but they were just trying to protect him from, like, frankly, winning or losing. It didn't work out brilliantly either way because Meghan was revealed as quite manipulative.
I mean, he is paranoid about the media. He does see evil around every corner. And he is perfectly capable of misinterpreting things, which is quite, I mean, those example I've spoken about before, when Meghan and the Queen did an away day in Cheshire, and Harry in Spare writes about how ghastly the media coverage was, and I look back at it, it was all incredibly positive and lovely. Sorry, Harry, what were you reading, mate? But looking forward, looking to the future a bit, I think it's very interesting to note. The Sun, Harry absolutely hated the Sun. He settles a court case against them, gets lots of money off them, gets an apology from them. And then in April this year, he takes them with him to Ukraine to see him doing stuff about landmines and drones. I thought, well, does this represent a new maturity on Harry's part, an ability to move on? Very interesting. Kind of watch this space.
Yeah. I mean, the rumor always was, wasn't it, that News International were always going to settle? I mean, that's been their MO throughout. But I do understand that the Mail were incredibly upset. And in fact, Valentine, it was when you and I were at the Standard, I think, that the Mail did that extraordinary front page. Doreen Lawrence's daughter, Stephen Lawrence, had been murdered in a horrific racist attack. The perpetrators could not be brought to justice. And the Mail ran this extraordinary front page. Murderers, if we are wrong, let them sue us. Now, I remember hearing at the time in the office, the gossip was that because Stephen Lawrence's father worked for Dacre, apparently, as doing plumbing. I think he was a plumber or builder and did work around his home. And that's how Dacre first heard of it, through his wife, and thought this was just the most unbelievable outrage of justice. And really, I think, he made it very clear in his evidence that he was unbelievably hurt by Doreen Lawrence turning on him. And I think she was hugely misled. And of anyone in this case, I think your heart has to go out to Doreen Lawrence.
Yeah, I mean, it's very sad what happened there, because I think, the Mail, the Porter Stephen Wright pursued that case, spent years of his life pursuing that case, with a sincerity and a dedication that was unrivaled. That for Doreen Lawrence to sort of think that he's wrong, it's all wrong.
Yeah, it was very sad. And no one sadder, I suspect, today than Prince Harry, whose tour to the United Kingdom got off to a bad start when he was told that he couldn't stay at Buckingham Palace, and has now got considerably worse with a bill from the Royal Courts of Justice that I imagine will exceed his bar bill at the Ritz or wherever he happens to be staying. Valentine Lowe, what an absolute pleasure to have you. Please come again. Thank you so much.
Tom, thank you very much. Always a pleasure.
Well, guys, I did tell you, didn't I? It was an absolute banger of a show. What a few days it has been, and more of it to come, of course, with the week ahead, culminating in Harry's appearance at Invictus Games on Friday. Still being told that Meghan could appear alongside him there. So who knows? We will have to wait and see, but we'll be here on the YouTube channel throughout the week, keeping you updated and keeping you informed. Well, I really hope you enjoyed today's show. I mean, Valentine Lowe obviously is a complete star. Obviously, my personal favorite bit was telling you about my new book, and I really do mean it. I am so incredibly grateful to the community that we've built here, and just, everybody who shows up week after week. And, I hope that I hope it's not a penance and that you enjoy being here for the show. So yeah, let me know your favorite bits. You know that I'm here in the comments, reading along, and we always read the comments afterwards. And it only really remains for me to thank my incredibly patient producer, Rachel Passer, who's had a particularly difficult day because we had to catch everything that happened today and then get the show out this evening. And also, of course, Valentine Lowe and Paula Froelich. And most of all, you guys, thanks a million for watching. Join me during the week. And if you want more in the meantime, don't forget about my Substack, The Royalist, QR code on the screen. And really, God save the King.